Welcome to Letters of Intent. I'm your host, Pankaj Raval, founder of Carbon Law Group, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Sahil Chaudry. Sahil, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and I'm very excited about today's episode. It's about something that sounds technical, but it's quietly reshaping deal risk, pricing models, and contract enforcement across industry. Tariffs under what people are calling Trump 2.0.
And to frame this, Sahil, Trump has said repeatedly, tariffs are the most beautiful word in the dictionary.
That's right. He loves the word tariff.
He loves the word. I don't know. I thought groceries was old school word, right? He loves groceries too.
Yeah.
Tariff is a great word. It just rolls off the tongue, you know?
Right.
This administration is treating tariffs not as a trade tool, but as a core policy weapon to really reshape international trade. So tell us what's happening now. We get news every day coming out of the administration about what's happening with tariffs. They're up, they're down, they're on, they're off. What's happening?
Well, we thought he was bluffing. He's not bluffing. And we're not just talking about a few targeted duties. We're talking about a baseline global tariff regime, country-specific penalties, product-specific tariffs, tariff stacking, a lot of litigation uncertainty, and a legal environment where contracts are breaking in real time because these tariffs are breaking people's margins and breaking the bank.
Absolutely. Let's level set here, Sahil. So when people hear tariffs and they think China, steel, maybe automobiles, that's not the story, is it? That's a very superficial understanding of tariffs.
That's right. Under the current framework, there's a 10% baseline reciprocal tariff on virtually all imports, effective since April 2025, unless a country is exempt or has a negotiated carve-out. Then layered on top of that are country-specific reciprocal tariffs, transshipment penalties at 40%, secondary tariffs tied to things like Russian, Iranian, or Venezuelan oil, and product-specific tariffs under Section 232 that go as high as 100%. If we take India, for example, on some apparel goods, the tariffs are now, including the tariffs related to the Russian sanctions, are as high as 67%.
Wow. And this is just like one tariff, right? I mean, there's issues with tariff stacking as well, right?
Exactly. That's the problem. First of all, you're subject to the baseline 10% tariff, and then there are multiple layers of tariffs that get stacked on top of that, depending on which country you're importing from.
This sounds like a mess. So here we are, founders and deal makers. Sometimes it's easy to get caught off guard because you don't know really what to expect. You can only plan for so much. So these tariffs, they don't just affect customs clearance, right? I mean, they affect who eats the cost under commercial agreements.
Exactly. Supply agreements, distribution contracts, manufacturing contracts, most of them were drafted before this level of tariff volatility was normal.
Interesting. So when tariffs spiked from 10% to 40% or 50% overnight, parties start asking, can we walk away? Can we suspend performance? Can we reprice unilaterally, right? Because that changes the whole economics of every deal.
Exactly. And courts are consistently saying only if your contract says you can.
Interesting. The importance of contracts, right? This is where people really need to understand what kind of contract you're signing and what those terms are, because it could really catch you off guard. So Sahil, this is really where the cases we've talked about in the past really matter. Kyocera, Shelter Forest, TPL. Why is that all that relevant right now?
Exactly. The court's position is clear. Tariffs are foreseeable in today's environment. And why does that matter? Because it relates to force majeure clauses. People, very creative attorneys, are trying to figure out what are ways to get out of contracts that are no longer financially viable. Well, one thing you could try is claiming that the tariffs are force majeure. They're an unanticipated occurrence that couldn't have been contemplated at the time of the contract. But courts are disagreeing with that position.
Interesting. So force majeure is not a valid defense anymore, which means that all companies need to be aware that this is of possible risk and need to be essentially addressing that in their contracts.
Exactly. And under Trump 2.0, that argument is even stronger. You have ongoing Section 232 investigations, rolling executive orders, public tariff threats posted on Truth Social. It's almost impossible to argue surprise. So that means that generic force majeure clauses, acts of government beyond our control, it's just not working.
Interesting. So effectively, these courts are now saying these are market risks, not impossibilities, valid under a force majeure defense, essentially.
That's exactly right. And now let's layer in litigation, because this is where things get really unstable.
So as of now, the federal circuit has said that these tariffs related to fentanyl import and export that Trump has probably used to say that this is an emergency under the IEPA. It's probably what he used to justify a lot of these tariffs, saying that there's a real threat of these drugs. We don't know exactly how big that threat is from China, but I'm sure that's what they're using to justify this quote unquote emergency action under IEPA. But enforcement essentially continues because of these injunctions are stayed effectively. Is that correct, Sahil?
That's right. The Supreme Court heard oral argument in November and a decision is pending.
So importers are paying tariffs that might be illegal, but if they don't preserve the refund right, then they could lose the money forever, which is kind of scary.
Exactly. And so, if you've been listening to us, you know that we've been talking about preserving your refund rights. It's more important than ever. So, that means from a contract standpoint, right now, no one knows which tariffs will stick, which will unwind, or who will ultimately bear the risk. That uncertainty is deadly for fixed price agreements, which most agreements are.
And one of the most dangerous parts of this regime is the tariff stacking.
Exactly. General duties, Section 301, Section 232, reciprocal tariffs, secondary sanctions. Many of these apply simultaneously.
And a company might model a 10% increase and end up with a 45% landed cost jump.
And if your contract doesn't clearly allocate tariff risk, courts assume the performing party accepted it.
And that's why we're seeing margin erosion turn into litigation, essentially additional costs for a lot of these buyers importing to the US.
Exactly. And so that's what's going on is people are trying to break their contracts so that they don't lose tons of money, but that's turning into litigation. So let's get practical to advise some of our clients. We have many clients who are importers. Pankaj, as of December 2025, what should companies actually be doing?
They've got to be auditing their contracts. Everyone who is importing goods, anyone importing from overseas, you've got to audit your contracts. You got to look at what are those terms, review your fixed price language, review your force majeure clauses, review your change in law provisions, your silence around tariffs, dispute resolution. Where are disputes being handled? How are they being handled? All these things really matter because it could be likelihood of disputes here. And also just being careful about how much you expose yourself and extend yourself with some of these deals. Because if you're taking on a lot of credit, a lot of financing that has high interest rates, and now your margins are eroded, you got to be aware of that. And you got to be probably a little bit more conservative with your outlook and forecasting when it comes to 2026.
I think what we're going to see is tariff allocation provisions in contracts that are explicit. Up until now, they have played an implicit role, but they have not played an explicit role. And I think
Right.
now we're going to see tariff risk will be allocated more clearly. We'll have to define who pays. Can the prices be adjusted if there's an increase? Is there a termination right? Is there a renegotiation trigger? The problem is that these tariffs will change in real time. And so that means these contracts have to become living, breathing documents that can respond to tariff risk.
Absolutely. Which is another reason I think you need to be constantly working with your counsel on these and tracking them in real time. This is not a one off transaction. This is an ongoing discussion and review that companies need to be engaged with their counsel or with internally someone to make sure that they're on top of these contracts and aware of the provisions in their agreements. So the big takeaway is this: tariffs under Trump 2.0 are not an anomaly. They are a structural feature of trade environment going forward, and they are going to be part of international trade for the next few years. So you've got to make sure that your contracts address this and you incorporate this into your forecasting.
That's exactly right. And the courts will not rescue you from bad drafting or not taking this into account. So risk allocation has to happen within your contracts, or you have to bake that risk into the price. If your agreements
Right.
haven't been updated for this tariff regime, now is the time, not after the next executive order.
All right, Sahil. So I think with that, we'll end it today. This is our follow up conversation on tariffs. We hope you guys found it interesting and useful. I think it definitely is some valuable advice and insight. And I think also applicable to many different industries, not just tariffs, but there's uncertainty in many different industries and many different regulated industries. So you want to make sure you're understanding what those laws are, how they're changing. And there's no one better to do that than your legal counsel to advise you on that. If you have questions, concerns, insights, please share them with us. We're always happy to hear from our listeners. Again, thank you again for taking the time to listen to us today. I am Pankaj Raval, founder of Carbon Law Group, and this is Letters of Intent.